slides on your end? Miranda, is it okay?
I see the presenter view.
Okay. Let's see. It must be backwards today.
I'm pretty
Okay.
sure Teams did an update too, because I've seen
Okay.
some new features popping up. So
Okay, maybe that is what it is. All right, well, let's try again. We'll do from beginning. Okay, now can you see it
yes, that's
correctly?
perfect.
Okay, it's backwards now.
Uh-oh.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, that just means one less step for future classes. I don't have to swap my screen around. I actually get the presenter view. Well, y'all, it's so nice to be with you. We're kind of be talking about caring for aging populations, but we're also talking about the caregiver. So, we're going to talk about how to care for yourselves while caring for others and how through you to the class. But I'm happy to answer any other questions too related to this kind of material. So my name is Abby Horton. I'm an assistant professor in the Capstone College of Nursing here at UA. I am a registered nurse, a certified health and life coach, a former Wellbeing Ambassador, and one of your wellness class educators. I also am taking students to clinical for the Wellbeing screenings. So if you sign up for a Wellbeing screening, you will likely see me there. And please come by and say hello. We're always happy to see you, especially when we are online. I don't get to see faces as much, but I'll remember names. And you're welcome to contact me at abby.horton@ua.edu if you have any questions or feedback or just want to reach out. So today we're going to be talking about how we can really address caregiving fatigue, age-related health concerns, and aging related stress. So learning how to plan, prepare, and care for age-related challenges is really important. Not only thinking about it for our loved ones, but also for ourselves. And then understanding common health concerns as we age, exploring healthy aging strategies, and discussing the role of caregiving and providing caregivers really support for what they're doing. Caregiving is sometimes a full-time job, even when you're not doing it full time, you're thinking about it full time. And so I think that that's important to acknowledge. Okay, so one of the things that I wanted to address here is just really my experience and background with caregiving. I think it's always so important when we teach things, particularly, for me as a healthcare provider, as a nurse, and then also for me as a health and life coach, that we're not teaching from a textbook, but that we're really teaching from experience. And so as I was driving in today, I was thinking about my caregiving experiences. And, for those of you who may be caregiving now or who may be anticipating this, it can be really heavy and emotional in terms of thinking about our loved ones, whether it's a parent or a spouse or a neighbor or another loved one in your family or a friend that's like your family, whatever role you're in, it can be a lot of emotional work as well as just physical and mental emotional load for you. And for me, my first caregiving experience was actually when I was in elementary school. My mom is a registered nurse, and she was taking care of her mother. And for the last year of my grandmother's life, she actually lived with us. And even as a young child, I was very much healthcare minded. I think I had always been raised in that environment. My grandmother on my dad's side had been a certified nursing assistant. And so I would tell people, I lived at the nursing home with my grandmother or at the hospital with my mom. I was always going back and forth between the two if I wasn't at school. And so seeing them provide care was really impactful to me. So when my grandmother came to live with us, I helped take care of her. And even as a young child, I did a lot of the work for her. So I would get things with her, I would sit with her. She was very, kind of frail toward the end of her life, and she would walk with a cane. And so she tried to really limit her mobility because it was difficult for her to stand by herself. And as a child, I couldn't stand for her, but I could walk for her. And so I helped with her baths and I helped with, putting on her, makeup and her lotion and her routine. And I put on her socks and her shoes because that was easier for me as a child to do. And she actually lived in my room for a year. So I was displaced for a year as a kid, moving from the couch to, wherever there was a free space. And I didn't mind. It was kind of an adventure. and I enjoyed being able to help with my grandmother's care. And eventually she had a fall, and that was the kind of the end, a few weeks for her after her fall. She had a hip fracture and went to the hospital, and that was really the end of our caregiving, and she passed away shortly thereafter. But that year really made a huge impact on my life, and just having me help with little things for my grandmother, like getting her food or taking her walker to her, or getting her bathrobe or house coat or things like that, putting her socks and shoes on. Those little things added up, and even as a child I could see how much work it was on my parents, especially my mom, to care for her. And so I've had many other caregiving experiences in my adult life, which I think caregiving is very different than nursing. And I want to point that out. Early on as a new nurse, I had a family member say, "You're so kind and caring to," and I believe that it was her husband. Um, she said, "You're so kind and caring to my husband, and I just don't understand why you have so much patience for him, and I don't." And I remember telling her, because I had been caregiving for multiple people, my mom after she had open heart surgery and a heart attack, my husband for extended periods of time with his cancer journey, my other grandmother before she passed away, um, with COPD. So I've had multiple experiences. And I, I told her, I smiled and I said, "Well, I appreciate you saying that I'm giving, your family member good care." And I said, "The reason that I can have patience is because he's not my family member." And I said, "And when I'm a caregiver, that's very different than being a nurse." I said, "As a nurse, I get to have some emotional and professional boundaries and distance from the situation. But seeing my family member when they're struggling or when they're having memory issues or whatever the case may be, I'm not so boundaried with that, and it is takes on a much more emotional toll." And so I just wanted to add this let's chat feature in today, because I think that that's true for many of us, that what we can handle professionally is not as the same that way we manage things personally. And for me, when my family members are sick or in the hospital, or I'm in that full caregiving role and not acting as a nurse, it's much different. Even though the care, the logistics, the practical part of what you're doing for them is similar. It's not the same, because as a nurse, I am not connected to them in that same emotional way. I don't have history with them. I don't remember what they were like before they got sick. But you do have those memories and that connection when you're the caregiver. And so if you want to pop anything into the chat and share, because of the new view, I'll have to do a few things to move around, but happy to answer questions or to talk more about that. But I think it's important to acknowledge just the bandwidth and the capacity that you have to really think about as you go into a caregiving role. So, some myths about healthy aging. We think that aging means declining health or disability. We think that aging means we automatically have dementia or memory loss, and that it's an inevitable part of aging. We think that sometimes we'll say, or we'll have family members that say, "Oh, well, some version of you can't teach an old dog new tricks," right? That I'm too old to change. I hear that from my parents a lot. My parents are in their early 70s, and they both have had some health issues. And so, as I'm thinking about my own healthy aging as I approach 40, and as I think about my parents who are aging and who have health issues, I think about my role in being able to both care for my young children and be able to care for my parents while caring for myself. And so that can be challenging. So we'll talk about that. It's called the sandwich generation, and I think many of us find ourselves in that position. So, things about aging, life expectancy for Americans is longer than ever before. Due to COVID, those numbers have actually changed a little bit. So, the average life expectancy is around 77 to 78 in the state of Alabama. It's closer to 78 for females, which is a typical trend. Women typically live longer than men. So, a typical Alabama female in 2022 would live to the age of 78. A typical Alabama male in the year of 2022 would live to be about the age of 76. And so those numbers are changing a good bit kind of post COVID. And there are a lot of factors and a lot of unknowns kind of surrounding that, but I think that's important. But once you reach age 65, and again, this was done before COVID, so I think this is probably different now, but at the time of the study, the current CDC data suggested that you could live an average of 20 years longer. So if you're alive at 65, it's likely that you're going to be alive at 85. And so that's important for planning purposes, but also, I think it's important for mindset. So my parents, my husband's parents, our grandparents, even, we don't have grandparents living any longer, but when our grandparents were living, they talked for so many years about, well, this may be my last holiday, or this may be my last birthday, or this may be my last fill in the blank milestone, right? And I think it's so important that us as caregivers, and then for our loved ones, living their life, it's so important not to focus on this maybe my last thing in the sense of it being a really melancholy thing, right? Because that can really take a lot of the joy out of the milestone or the event. It may truly be their last milestone, their last holiday, but when you frame that, especially when you're framing it for the caregivers in your lives and in the lives of your young family members, think about children. That can be really discouraging and can kind of put a damper on the celebration aspect. And so we can't change anyone. It's hard enough to change ourselves, but if we can start framing things as being a celebratory moment and looking at, the first, this is the first time I've done this. This is a new thing that I'm thinking about doing. Instead of everything being the last, I think that can be really helpful because around age 65 is when people start thinking about end of life and start thinking about last moments. But the current data suggests that you might be doing that for 20 years and you might miss out on a lot of fun and a lot of happy memories by framing things so negatively. So, for many people who are living with chronic health conditions, it's important that we manage those health conditions, but also that we manage our own health. So, people, especially if you're caring for a spouse in a caregiver role, the data suggest that the caregiver, within 1 to 2 years after the family member passing away, like I said, particularly if it's a spouse, that spouse either has a health condition worsen or a new health condition actually present itself, and that person then becomes very ill and needs their own caregiver. And so I think it's important to prioritize our own health. I know for me, when I was caregiving for my mom and caregiving for my husband during his cancer journey, he's had multiple types of cancers, multiple reoccurrences over the last 10 to 12 or so years. And then caregiving for my grandmother, I had young children and was in graduate school at the time. And so it was very difficult for me to keep my appointments for my young children who were babies and toddlers while also getting my loved ones to their appointments, while also working full time, while also being in graduate school. And so a lot of times if something got canceled, of course it was my appointment because I had more control over that. And so I think that that is part of the conversation about why caregivers then become so sick. It's because they have not taken their own appointments, they've not taken their own self-care into consideration, and they've delayed or deferred their own health issues because of it. I think there's also an emotional component as well that we haven't really studied or explored enough, but just think about that if you are a caregiver, is you have to take care of yourself to be able to take care of others. You deserve to be taken care of even if you aren't taking care of anyone. But it's that notion of putting your own oxygen mask on first. So, healthy living as we age, physiological changes definitely happen and are a part of our natural aging process. And some diseases and conditions become more prominent, so things worsen over time. Psychosocial needs become a huge factor, but we often don't really pay attention to these. Things like community and connection. A longitudinal study at Harvard that looked at almost for 70 years, participants and how happy and healthy they were over their lifespan determined that social connection, community, social interactions, friendships, relationships, those were the most kind of indicating, the strongest indicators of healthy life and happiness and longevity. for people. And so, having those psychosocial needs met are so important. You often heard, this is not a term that's used any longer, but you would talk about people who were shut-ins, people who had no way to leave home, or they had mobility issues and they didn't have people come and visit them. Their mental health and their physical health would often deteriorate more rapidly, even when you factor in what they were diagnosed with, simply because they weren't getting their psychosocial needs met and probably some of their other basic needs as well. We call those basic needs activities of daily living, or ADLs. And so, oftentimes when we think about meeting the needs of people, it's their ADLs, right? That they can bathe, that they can feed themselves, that they can, toilet themselves by themselves. They can go and do what they need to do. They can get their meals prepared and, the basic house cleaning, those kinds of things. But the psychosocial needs are as important, and over the long term more important once your basic needs are met. And then routine screenings and preventative measures are encouraged. Again, we have a wonderful well-being program that you can participate in and get some basic routine screenings. We also have the faculty staff clinic and many other resources on our campus and in our community to get those for free or reduced cost, or even some of them are incentivized, like our well-being programs and rewards. And so taking advantage of those is really helpful, but also looking to schedule things and keeping those appointments with yourself. So, there are going to be times where you have to cancel appointments. That's just life, but making sure that you're not canceling yours, in a routine way where you're not getting your healthcare needs met. And then safety measures within the home. There's a saying about, what is an ounce of prevention is a pound of cure, meaning that if you can prevent something from happening, that's better than trying to cure or treat it. And that's so true in every aspect of our lives. So if you can prevent falls from happening because you've got lamps and you've got night lights, if you can prevent falls, because you have taken up the throw rugs that people might trip on, if you have made sure that, things are out of reach that might be hazardous, if you've, given your family member, some sort of like safety call mechanism. So, there's lots of devices now. It's not just the necklace that people used to wear when, they would have a fall, they could press that emergency button. There's lots of different things that you can use now, even things like Apple Watches. One of our family members was having a lot of memory issues and just like acute memory problems. And so I gave that family member my Apple Watch because then I could track that family member and it would give me their ratings in terms of like if their heart rate was getting out of the normal range, if they were having breathing issues, if they were leaving the designated area, then it would alert me. And of course, we did that with all the consent and, being really mindful of maintaining a person's integrity and their privacy. But that was really helpful. Putting an alarm system in the home, that can be really helpful. Simply Safe is one that I use and recommend. I'm not affiliated, but it is a more economical option and it attaches with basically command strips so it doesn't damage the walls. It doesn't have to be hardwired in. You do have to have a Wi-Fi or some type of cellular connection, and they have good customer service support. So when this family member started wandering and leaving home or forgetting to lock doors or to shut doors, which is really common with memory issues and dementia or any kind of like mental health issue that can play a role, that was a safety measure that I implemented so that I would know if the alarm went off or if a door was open. That's not something that I had needed before, but that's something that became really, really helpful. So those are just some suggestions of safety measures that you can take and put into place that can give you some buffers and barriers against, things that we might be concerned about. So the body does change, but like we said, everybody is uniquely different and every body system is impacted uniquely by aging. And a lot of the things that we consider to be normal aren't necessarily normal. it's something that is common. Okay. So thinking about common versus expected or normal is something I want you to think about. So as the skin ages, it becomes less flexible, thinner, and more fragile. And that's why you might have the aging spots, the skin tags. Your skin becomes more brittle and dry typically. Again, this can be because of natural aging, but it also can be because a lot of our vitamins and nutrients and minerals and things get depleted. And so we always need to ask ourselves, I would say even starting in our, mid 30s, is this a normal sign of aging or is there something more going on? And always try to find the root cause first. Bones and joints and muscles tend to lose density. The muscles become smaller. The joints may become inflamed and you become usually less flexible due to wear and tear, but also it's this notion of if you don't use it, you lose it. And so making sure that we're moving our bodies, doing things like weight training and doing things like walking, making sure that we're having 150. Um, okay, Miranda, have I lost y'all?
We did have like a glitch there for a second.
Okay, you disappeared and then I'm hearing some noises. I wanted to make sure we were still rolling.
Can
Okay.
everybody else hear? I saw someone lost sound, but I think it's back now.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I just wanted to make sure. And you are still disappeared, but I'm not going to exit out. So mobility and balance can be really important as well to maintain. There are exercises that you can do. There's physical therapy, there's occupational therapy, there is just basic exercise, like I was talking about. 150 minutes a week of moderate to vigorous exercise, meaning that you are a little bit breathless, but you can still carry on a conversation pretty easily while you're walking or while you're exercising, is the level of vigorousness that we want you to try to aim for. And then, of course, muscle loss, fat metabolism is reduced, hormonal changes happen. And so, a redistribution of your body composition and your fat or adipose tissue, your muscle, all of that can shift and change, particularly for women with the hormonal changes. And so, men and women have hormonal changes, and hormonal control is impacted by blood sugar, how many carbs we eat, especially if we're eating simple carbs that turn to sugar really quickly, how we metabolize our carbohydrates, our cholesterol, our thyroid function can be impacted. But there's also this notion of what we call the rain barrel effect. And Stephen Cabral wrote a book called The Rain Barrel Effect. He has a website and a podcast, lots of free resources. And he talks about, if we all have a rain barrel, our capacity for toxins and for environmental exposures and for a lot of the lifestyle changes, disease processes that we've experienced in our lives, right? Viruses and all of the lifestyle choices that we make add up. And so our rain barrel overflows when it gets full. And that happens for some people at a really young age, and that happens for other people at an older age. And so that rain barrel is symbolizing our capacity for the extra things that our body's having to process and having to manage. And so hormones can play a big role in that. Alterations in our sexual hormones can lead to vaginal dryness. It can lead to erectile dysfunction. Vitamins and nutrients, even at young ages, 20 and 30-year-olds are walking around with vitamin D deficiency, B12 deficiency, magnesium deficiency. Those are the three most common deficiencies in terms of vitamins and nutrients. And so it's important that when you go for your annual check that you are aware of any of those that may be trending downward or that may be just within the normal range, because it can make a huge difference in how well you feel and how your body heals itself and repairs itself. Even just having vitamin D deficiency and you have no other health problems, it's going to impact your overall health and wellness and how you heal and repair and how you feel, your energy levels. And so I can personally speak to that because I've had deficiency in vitamin D for more than 10 years. And supplementation and getting sun exposure is not always super effective for some folks. And so Stress hormones can also deplete these things. So as we add these back in with food, which is always best, or supplements, we're depleting it with stress. And so it's a constant, kind of recalibration of what we need. Our teeth and our gums, our hair, our nails, our memory lapses may occur. Um, and that's something to take note of. If you have some simple memory lapses, that's going to happen. It may be that you're overloaded. I have those. I had one this morning with Miranda. She witnessed it. And so it's not to say that those are, some type of, pathological thing that's, severe. Sometimes it's just that we didn't sleep well. But if we notice that we're having more and more, memory lapses that are very simple, and these are not just that, oh, I walked into a room and I don't know what I was coming in here to look for. It can be that, but it also can be things like mixing something up, or it can be saying the incorrect word, or it could be, forgetting an appointment, those kinds of things. And so you've got to really assess whether it's a true brain health issue, which could be mental health, it could be, something physical causing an issue, or is it environmental? Is it lifestyle? Is it too much sugar? Is it not enough sleep? Is it too much on your plate? A lot of times it's all of it, and that's what makes it more difficult for you to really kind of course correct because you've got a lot of different puzzle pieces you're having to get in the right places. And when I say right with air quotes. Immunity becomes weaker, usually because white blood cells become less effective. Again, we can influence that because if we're hydrating, eating well, moving our body, our blood cells are going to be more effective for longer. Hearing can change, particularly for men because of their hormones. Men typically have about 4 periods where they can lose their hearing. And of course, hearing loss can happen at any time for anybody, but there are definitely times where hearing, because of hormonal changes, can be more impacted, and older adults can have a significant hearing loss especially in the high frequencies. So voices that are higher pitched like mine can be difficult to hear. Vision certainly can change as can become drier. The lens acuity can shift. But I want to share a story with you that I think will be inspiring. I actually went to the eye doctor this week. I am 38 and I've had a lot of health issues since I was 12 years old. And I had a tumor removed last year that was on my adrenal gland and liver, and it was causing a lot of inflammation. Okay. Well, starting in fourth grade, which is around the time that I first became sick with some chronic health issues, I noticed that it was hard for me to see the whiteboard. We had just upgraded from chalkboards to whiteboards. So it was hard to see the whiteboard, and I had to ask my teacher if I could move closer to the board, and I still was having trouble seeing. I was having a lot of double and blurry vision. And so eventually my teacher said, okay, she's as close to the board as she can get. You need to take her to the eye doctor. And so I have been to the eye doctor every year since fourth grade. And I have had, basically issues with reading and reading up close and also reading far away. And over the years, that's changed back and forth between which was more concerning and more problematic for me. I have never had, since I've been tested, 20/20 vision. Well, when I went to the eye doctor this week, my ocular pressure, which had been high the last few years, not to the level of glaucoma, but my pressures had been high in my retina and in my ocular nerve. Okay, so that had been high for 3 to 4 years. I have a family history of glaucoma, so that was a concern. And my visual acuity had been getting worse, meaning that my strength in my glasses needed to change. Well, when I went this week, I am older, and this all started when I was in my early 30s. I am now 38. My vision is better than perfect. I have normal ocular pressure, and my dry eyes and my visual acuity and all of the other issues that I was having with my eyes have completely resolved. And so most people are going to tell you that once your vision starts to deteriorate, or fill in the blank, whatever it is for you, will only get worse as you go. Well, it will only get worse as you go if you don't do something about it. And I had done a lot of healthy things to try to impact my health. and made a lot of lifestyle changes. But the tumor for me personally was the key to getting my inflammation down and having these, beneficial improvements. And so it's not going to be a tumor for you, likely, hopefully. It's not going to be, a cancer diagnosis like it was for my husband, or a heart disease like it was for my mom, or a hip fracture like it was for my grandmother. But by telling you some of these stories, hopefully it's making it relatable, and also it's giving you hope that just because you have a problem or your loved one has a problem doesn't mean that there aren't things that you can't do to actually improve the quality of life, or even in some instances reverse the signs and symptoms of a problem. And then, of course, we know taste and smell acuity diminish. Typically, men have less taste and smell acuity than women. And I think that's important to note. Many people don't know that. And so if you're complaining about something smells weird, but maybe your spouse, if your spouse is a man, doesn't notice it may be that he truly can't. It may not be that he's not validating what you're saying. It may be that he truly cannot smell it. And that's important to note because older people, as they age, tend to eat less. Their appetite tends to diminish. Well, when our taste and our smell go away, and then add in maybe eyesight issues, if you can't see your food, if you can't taste your food, if you can't smell your food, about 50% or so of our taste is influenced by our ability to smell food, then we're not going to enjoy it. So then we're not going to have an appetite. And then there's other factors at play. I actually had sinus surgery in my early 30s, and I realized after the sinus surgery that I had never been able to smell fresh fruit. I walked into the produce section with my husband and kids, and I immediately got nauseated. And I looked at my husband and I said, "What is that sickening sweet smell?" And we were walking past like tomatoes and pineapples and things, and he was like, "This is what their produce section always smells like." And I said, "I've never been able to smell the food before." And I immediately started losing weight after the surgery, and I thought it was due to the recovery. But what was happening was that I never felt satiated. I never felt full or satisfied by my food because I couldn't smell the food. And that is a part of the mechanism that tells us when we need to stop eating or when we need to eat. And so there's so many things about our health that can be complicated and complex. But what I want you to hear from me is that there's so many things we can do to make it better. Hand dexterity, again, that can be an issue for people, especially opening things. This is going to impact their ability to be independent. So, doing occupational therapy, particularly with hands, but also physical therapy. So, we have that large group in muscle strength. Most people are going to be significantly stronger in their legs versus their arms. And so, particularly for women, women tend to be more um, um, I guess they tend to be weaker in their upper body strength, but that's true of everyone because our large muscle groups are in our thighs. But that can be difficult. So we might need to build up our strength with weight training and then work on our hand dexterity to be able to have the strength to open things. Bowel and bladder control, and then, of course, sleep patterns change. And sleep patterns do change. That is well documented where you need less sleep and you have more occurrences of waking up during the night. And so making adjustments to your schedule and having a good sleep routine can be helpful. We call that sleep hygiene. And we have tons of resources about all of these different things on our wellness.ua.edu site, and some classes on how to, do the wellness basics that I teach. Some other experts on campus have done sleep, hygiene classes. So we just want to point out some of these things so that you can make some changes one thing at a time. Other health concerns can be things like cancer, diabetes, dementia, osteoporosis, with that bone health becoming an issue, that loss of bone density, again, typically that we see in females because of hormones. COPD, which is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, it's a lung disorder. Influenza, so the flu, pneumonia, shingles, and then depression. So, doing our cancer screenings, doing our wellness screenings, doing our vaccination or immunization screenings, and then our mental health checks. So, things like depression and anxiety. Most people who are having mental health issues who have significant issues on their health tend to have depression and anxiety as a challenge for them, but the most significant ones will be around depression. And so that's something to really take note of. And there's questions that you can ask. But there are things like, are you having a loss of interest in things? For me, my grandmother looked like someone who was depressed. Even though she didn't score that on her screening, we usually use what's called a PHQ-9, but it was because she had lost a lot of hearing and it was very significant. So she was getting tired of asking people to repeat themselves. And so she would just nod and say yes because she couldn't hear and she didn't want to ask you to repeat because she got frustrated, the other people got frustrated. So she would just smile and nod. The restaurant noise would get so loud, or going to church for her would get so loud, and she couldn't hear the words any longer. So she stopped wanting to go to church. She stopped wanting to go eat out with family. She stopped wanting to host people for Sunday dinners, which were all things that were built in community and connection for her because she couldn't hear with all of the background noise, and that became really difficult. So one to one was best for her. So she looked like someone who was depressed, but really she was feeling the loss of missing out and grieving the fact that she couldn't do life the way she had done before. And so I think that that's really an important distinction because she could have gotten hearing aids had she voiced that concern, but she didn't. And so, and that wasn't something that was screened for. And that was really problematic for her being able to get the resources that she needed. People just thought that she was getting older and tired and just didn't want to do things, when in reality, it was that she couldn't hear and she needed hearing aids. So, other common concerns can be things like housing, transportation, financial well being, end of life decisions, legal concerns, end of life care, nursing homes and retirement communities, respite care. So, that's a specific type of resource for caregivers that might need respite care. So, someone that can watch or care for your loved one while you get the care that you need, going to your doctor's appointments, going to take breaks, going to work, even memory loss, elder abuse, safety, mental health and wellness, and then things like I list hoarding here because that's one of the top ones listed, but it's really about managing the things that you still own in your life. So it may not be true hoarding, but it's deciding what stays and what goes in your life, and that can be tangible and intangible. So other things like I mentioned, pulling out from the list, these are the big ones that we see in healthcare that independently and collectively impact ADLs and then impact their ability to care for themselves. And then these are the things: falls, home safety, financial issues, health insurance, health access. These are the kinds of things that tend to be the kind of final straw that prompts people to need to live with a loved one or live in a care facility, or what we call a skilled nursing facility or a retirement home. And so falls being the number one, and then just overall home safety. So, identifying resources, expanding your knowledge, developing a care plan, and prioritizing your own health and well being while also trying to care for your loved ones is really important. I've linked some resources here for you, and y'all will have these slides so you can come back to these. But I think where to begin really is, even before you identify your resources, is identifying where you need to make changes. And so, this is something that all of us need to do. I was talking with some colleagues yesterday and I said, I right now am in the assessment phase. So, the nursing process, we have a nursing process, it's called ADPI, and it's assessment, diagnosis, implementation or intervention, planning, and evaluation. I did those two out of order, the P and the I out of order. And so we go through this process and it's a cyclical process. And so I was joking with my nursing colleagues yesterday and said, I'm still in the assessment phase of figuring out what I need. And then I will move to the problem solving solution. So all of us need to do this in our lives. It's just particularly important when you are acting as a caregiver. So I mentioned the sandwich generation earlier, and this is just a short, I would almost say it's a poem about how you feel a little stuck in the middle, right? You might be caring for kids or grandkids, and taking care of loved ones while also probably being in the season of your career where you have more work responsibility, while also having your own health issues that you need to attend to, while also doing a lot of other things, right? Life can be very complicated, and it's a beautiful complication a lot of times. And that can be even more of the challenge is that when you want to say no, you're saying no to good things, right? You're saying no to things that you don't want to say no to. You just don't necessarily have the capacity to do it all. And I think that that is what's challenging. If they were easy no's, this wouldn't be a hard thing to do. So this is here for you, the sandwich generation with pickles on the side. Y'all can read through that, but I hope that helps you. And, caring for the caregiver, again, it's easier when other people can do that for us. So if you are a caregiver or if you know someone who is, helping them help themselves is probably the best thing that you can do. So, reminding them to take care of themselves, monitoring mental health for you or for someone else, keeping your appointments, reaching out for professional help. So, for you and for your loved ones, that might look like counseling, that might look like a babysitting service for young children. That might look like a care service during the day or a sitter service during the night for the family member so that you can get rest and sleep. That might be home health, especially if it's something that's going to be a longer process, a recovery from a surgery or end of life care. Um, Practicing mindfulness and meditation. We have a lot of information on our website about that. Seeking respite care. So maybe that's a church group. Maybe that's a social group that you belong to in the community. Maybe that's an official respite care service. There's lots of those in the West Alabama area. Setting healthy boundaries. So knowing when you can say yes and when you want to say no, acknowledging and honoring how you feel and just acknowledging how hard things are sometimes can be really helpful. And then asking for help as soon as you know that you need it. A lot of times people who are caregivers, and nurses are like this. So I feel like I can say that this is true. We oftentimes don't ask for help because we are the helpers, and that's so much a part of our identity that we don't ask others, or we don't surround ourselves with people who are also helpers. We're surrounded by people who need the help. So, finding a support group, even if it's online, can be helpful. Connecting with other caregivers and then taking time for yourself. I listed that again because I think it's important that you take time for you, but you don't isolate. You also find people who can understand what you're going through. And sometimes it's better to have people outside of your everyday life to connect with because they can understand without having a direct impact on your life. Talking to a colleague or coworker or church member or family member or somebody in the soccer league with your kids or grandkids, whomever it may be, a neighbor. Sometimes we don't want them having those intimate details of our lives, or we feel like that might negatively impact us in some way, so we self-edit and we don't share like we normally would. And that's okay. Everyone has a different level of vulnerability with that, but I think it's important that we do connect with someone who can understand us. And sometimes the friends that we find on the internet seem to understand us better than the people who've known us all of our lives. That's been my experience. When my husband became very ill, I did have to find a community of resources outside of the Tuscaloosa area. I did find that support online and through friends because um, I was a young wife and mother in my late 20s when my husband became so sick, and that was not something that was really typical. But I knew a lot of people who were going through that. And so I also didn't want to be as vulnerable as I can be now. Fast forward, 10 to 12 years later, and my comfort level with that is different, right? And I still very much am aware and careful of what I share. I don't share everything, but I share a lot, so people probably think it's everything, that it's the whole story. But I think it's important that we are honest with ourselves and others about our level of vulnerability. And our willingness to be authentic in that, because if we're holding back our authenticity and our vulnerability with people who are trustworthy, that's going to be difficult on the connection, right? We can feel that when people are holding back. And so I would encourage you to explore that. Healthy aging is possible. So I think that's really the key that I want to leave you with is that healthy aging is possible. And not only is it possible, it's something that our body is designed to do well. Our body, given everything that it needs, is designed to heal itself. And it's just a matter of giving it the right ingredients. And again, I say right in air quotes because my right ingredients are not going to be your right ingredients. But giving it the ingredients that it needs to heal is key. And figuring that out is hard. But the basics are the same, right? The wellness basics are the same. It's good water, good nutrition, it's good sleep, it's mindfulness, it's movement, it's all the things that we learned in kindergarten that we know we need to do. It's being kind to ourselves and others. It's taking breaks. It's resting. It's being grateful and thankful. It's getting outside, right? Think about the things that we did in kindergarten that we no longer did, right? Nap time went away, all of kind of the self-compassion we got in kindergarten that we learned, that went away starting in first grade because we got our first report cards. Those are the kinds of things that we need to do. Take it back to kindergarten and really get in touch with what we need. And when we can get quiet, we will start to see where we need to make changes. And I teach this, I know this, head knowledge does not equal habit change. And so I have to constantly remind myself that I have to do these things too, that I'm not superhuman and I'm not, somehow out of the equation. I have to do this as well. And it's easy to get caught up in busy seasons of life and not do the basics. So identify your areas of concern, use your resources to make changes, and then track your progress. Progress is so key because you can feel like you're not making any headway, but if you'll look back on a journal entry, on a photo that you took, on a selfie, on a social media post, on a text message change to your best friend, you can look back and when you do that more objectively, you can see where you've actually made changes. So, how do we live longer lives? We go to all of our physical exam appointments, we do our routine preventative screens, we eat a healthy diet, we exercise regularly, we stay active and engaged. Purpose is so important, especially for people when they retire. A lot of people don't do well after they retire because they lose their sense of community and connection and purpose, and that's so important. Grandparents who watch their kids or grandkids, they or have someone that they're, helping out in some way, they live longer and are happier and healthier. Maintaining a healthy BMI, that body mass index, that's calculated based on your height and your weight and your bone structure, avoiding unhealthy behaviors, and creating a healthy life and lifestyle. So, these next few slides are things about aging well, learning to cope with change. I'm going to just go through these as a resource, finding meaning and joy. And this is for us. This is for the person being cared for, and this is for the caregiver, or just any human. Maybe you're just on the call today. Staying connected, staying active, staying mentally sharp. So, some activities that we were told by my husband's neurologist probably more than a decade ago is I was ready to go into nurse mode and do all of this brain health work, right? I was ready to tell him he couldn't drink his Diet Coke, which is still not healthy. I was ready to tell him he needed to do Sudoku puzzles every day and play on the apps that have like the different, puzzles and word scrambles that help activate the brain. And I think the neurologist could tell that I was a little over the top and that my husband wasn't really interested in doing those things at the time because he was so incredibly sick. And so the neurologist said, all of that is great to try to stay mentally sharp. There's research and data that say that those are good things to do. He said, but I'm going to tell you now, if you are one, making someone do that and they don't want to, or two, you're choosing activities that they wouldn't have enjoyed on a good day. Like they would never have been interested in doing a Sudoku puzzle. I am not. If I ever have dementia or cognitive issues, I hope that they don't give me Sudoku. I hope they give me a word scramble because I would do that all day long, right? Or a crossword puzzle. Please give me words, don't give me math. But in all seriousness, if we're, kind of forcing people to do things that they don't naturally enjoy, he said that would be more detrimental to their mental health and their brain health than just supporting them in what they're doing. And taking away things, taking away coping mechanisms, which if you know anyone who loves Diet Coke, or for me, Coke, it is a coping strategy, right? Diet Coke is both fun and a coping strategy. Taking that away from them, cold turkey, is not going to help their mental health or their physical health or their brain health. And so, really being strategic about making what you're doing fun and meaningful, that is the key. And then long-term plans, making sure that you understand retirement and healthcare costs now. I went in when I became an employee, a full-time employee with benefits. I was around 32 or 33 years old. And so I went in and met with a retirement counselor here through our benefits office. And the person that met with me said, it's surprising to see someone who's just starting their career and who's so young thinking about retirement. But I really took the phrase plan with the end in mind or begin with the end in mind because I wanted to make sure that when I made choices that I was setting myself up for success. My husband is a good bit older than me, and so I'm looking at retirement years where I may be widowed. I'm looking at, with our longevity for women, typically live 16 to 20 years longer than men. And so the financial considerations, the financial tips and strategies that are used are typically for men, not for women, and for their lifespan and for their health needs. And so, making sure that you're meeting with someone who's very much aware of those kinds of challenges, right? That there's some gendered norms around financial health and retirement and savings so that you don't run out of resources when you need them the most. Those are the kinds of things that you want to think about. They're not fun things to think about, but it will give you some peace of mind. There's also lots of tools about, advanced directives, living wills, healthcare proxies, legal things that you can do, things that you can access for free online. There's books about, what end of life care, what, things need to happen next after we're facing end of life, which is not a fun thing to think about. Thinking about just decisions that might need to be made and knowing what your loved ones want is a real peace of mind. Knowing what my grandmother wanted when I was asked about her end of life care. The burden of making those decisions was hard for me, but knowing that I knew what she would have wanted made it so much better. Having to have guessed at those kinds of things would have been really difficult for me. When I was asked if my mom would take blood with a blood transfusion after her heart surgery, it was very distressing to my other family members. And so they asked me to make the decision. And I said, yes, she's a nurse. She would want that if it's a life sustaining measure. And I felt very confident in saying that she would want to receive blood, but that was very uncomfortable for many people in my family. So, knowing those things, even though they're hard conversations to have, is really helpful in the moment. And I speak from personal experience. And I speak from professional experience seeing people agonize over those kinds of decisions. And then a toolkit for healthy aging continued. This is the blue zones. I know our office at the Wellness Work Life really enjoy blue zone information. It's talking about people who live long lives. So there are 5 regions and now a sixth in Singapore that have these blue zones where people live to be centenarians, so 100 years or older, and the things that make them healthier. So that's the power of nine. And you can go onto this website. There's books, there's cookbooks, there's a Netflix and Hulu documentary. So lots of information on that if you're interested in longevity. But it's all about holistic health, so mind, body, and spirit. And so I use these to indicate mind and body and spirit. So these are some other things that you can consider to do to stay fit. And then again, the routine appointments that we recommend for you to do yearly. And then I think, like I mentioned earlier, journaling and keeping track is so important. We need to know that we're making progress even when it doesn't feel like it. Some apps that I love, if you only got one app, I love the Fit On app. Fit On app is so helpful to me. I use it every day. It's my most used app. And Miranda on the call actually shared it with me. She discovered it, I think, over the COVID break. And it is so good for exercise, for blogging health information, for meditations, for music. There's so many great things in the Fit On app. So I encourage you to download it. You can pay for it, but it is the best free app I have ever downloaded. And then just to leave you with, you're never too old to set another goal or to dream a new dream. And so when your loved ones tell you that they're too old to do X, Y, or Z, remind them of this quote. And then we're happy to have you follow us on all of our social media. Miranda and Sierra and Carolyn do a phenomenal job of managing all that is wellness work life. Lots of good resources for you. So with that, I'm going to try to find where y'all disappeared and see if I can answer some of your questions. All right. And Miranda, if you'll help me. Okay. ADL is activities of daily living. Yes. Oh, Caitlin's on. Hey, Caitlin. She's one of my nursing colleagues. She can help me answer questions. And activities of daily living are things like I can get dressed by myself, I can button things by myself. So having things like zippers are really helpful because usually that's easier to wear. There's some adaptive clothing that you can get if you have someone who has like some type of prosthetic, or maybe it's that they have issues with their hands, maybe it's that they've had a surgery. Like I had to be really careful about the clothes I used because I couldn't pull things over my head after I had my abdominal incision. It was 6 inches, so I wasn't allowed to raise above this level, and I had T-Rex arms, and so I had to have a lot of zippered clothing. They make some buttoned, strong button clothing so that people can still wear, their typical garments. So being able to feed themselves, go to the restroom, be able to stay home, those are activities of daily living. I'm glad this was helpful. Thank you, Susan. Yeah, thanks, Lillian, Donna. Do you have any suggestions or resources for dealing with parents in denial about their major health issues, terminal illnesses, near total immobility? I would say to have a conversation with them. I'm sure you have. When you are feeling good and feeling like you can have the conversation, and y'all, I know we're probably going to be out of our time, but you're welcome to stay on and I'll finish up answering your questions. Having that conversation with them when it's not such a heated thing and you can be one to one sitting down, having a dedicated time for that where kids aren't around, extra people aren't around, because it can be really embarrassing to them. And then if that's not helpful and you see that there's some real challenges that need to be addressed, talking to their healthcare provider or someone that's a trusted advisor or mentor. It could be like a pastor, a neighbor, a former colleague. It could be, someone in your community that has a healthcare background. Their healthcare provider ultimately is going to need to be the one that really helps you and needs to be aware that they're having some denial issues. But having someone else really say what you're saying in a more objective way can be very, very beneficial. And I've seen that work personally and professionally. But it's hard. Zippers, Amazon. Yes, Amazon. Caitlin, thanks for sharing that. Yes, Amazon is where I got all of the things that I needed to be able to have T-Rex arms for 2 months. You can get a lot of adaptive clothing and look for zippers and Velcro. You can also get things like pillows. Like I have a pillow that I use in the car after surgery to help with the seat belt. There's so many great things on Amazon and other places that you can get to make your life easier. For those that need physical therapy. Oh yeah, great recommendation. So yeah, there's a ton of great resources for physical therapy in our area. We're very fortunate with that. All right, thanks Kim and Madeline. Thanks Patrick. Thanks Melanie. Yeah, thanks Amy. I hope that helps. If y'all think of other things, y'all are welcome to reach out as well. Thanks, Kathy. Thank y'all so much for joining. I'm glad we had a small group. I hope this was helpful. Feel free to put anything else in the chat if you've got more feedback. But if not, we'll close out with that and I'll just say thank you. I hope you do one thing to take something off your plate, your to-do list, or build in some self-care, but make sure you put it on your calendar because what gets scheduled gets done. Thanks,
Yes.
guys.
Have a great afternoon.